Hello there and welcome back to the studio. Today, here's an image of the painting that will be created in today's episode. On the top left corner of your screen there will be the photo reference. Yes, this will be a Leonardo da Vinci master study. So I'm using a little bit of my drawing medium, okay? A little bit of my drawing medium and burnt umber as my drawing color of choice. So let's suppose I'm going to place the corner of the head over here, and if you want to know exactly what Leonardo da Vinci painting that is, I'm just going to go ahead and start typing the name of the painting that we are creating the master study of in the description box down below. Now with each of these videos, I think it seems as though I need to clarify the purpose of each of these videos. Each of these videos are paint-alongs, okay, so they are designed for you to draw or paint along with me. So by the way, there is time for you to go and get your sketchbook or your oil paints, your acrylics, gouache, or whatever you want to work with, and draw or paint along with me. Come on, get a sketchbook. I know you can do it. I know you have a sketchbook over there. Go ahead, get your sketchbook and draw or paint along with me. Yes, that is the purpose of these episodes. The purpose is to create a paint along, okay, for you to draw or paint along with me. These master studies are not master copies. This is not a history lesson. If you want to know the history involved in the particular painting, there are you know, sites and resources such as Google Arts and Culture that you can look into to get that information. Okay, so a little bit under 2 minutes into the video here, I think I've explained what I needed to explain. Okay, this is a master copy, not a master copy. This is a master study, not a master copy. If my purpose was to make a perfect photographic rendition of this painting, I would just get the photograph printed onto the canvas, call it a day. But that is not what I am after, and I'm not trying to use the same type of techniques as Leonardo da Vinci. No, we are using our own techniques. This is a learning experience with the painting as an end result. Okay, now that we have all of that out of the way, let's talk about what is already established on the canvas here. So we have the placement of the head. Okay, the most important thing is the gesture, that is the orientation of the head in space and the placement of the head on the canvas. Now this is an 8 by 10 inch cotton canvas. It's not a fairly large canvas, so I want the head to take up most of the space. So I think that we're doing all right here. It's probably a little bit long, so I'm going to move the chin up to about here. Okay. There. Now the neck probably is getting a little bit too wide, so now what we're going to do is we're going to transition into a stage of which we use simple straight lines and angles to simplify the forms and keeping our shapes relatively simple. Now what do you think the next stage is? If you've been watching, okay, for a while, the first step, I'll give you the name, composition. What's the next step? Okay, so if you were thinking block in, that is correct. Now we are entering into the block in stage of this painting. So what we're going to do is we're going to use simple straight lines and angles. We're going to simplify all of these complex forms that we are observing. And we are going to set up the drawing in such a way that we can then move on to the next stages and then ultimately completing our master study. So a little bit of a corner over here. Now Leonardo da Vinci, I will admit this is my first master study of Leonardo da Vinci, so right away I'm thinking that I'm going to have to strategize in terms of the linear aspects in my block in. Usually I'm a little more lenient with the the specificity in the block in, but since I think that this is more or less, there's less values in the face, you know, like you're seeing in the photo reference over there, I think that I'm going to prioritize the drawing, the umber drawing a little bit more. So I'm going to slow down with the umber drawing a little bit. Here's the axes of the eyes right around here. Okay, so the top of the head, well this, you know, at first when I saw this, I thought that like she was wearing a headband or something, but now it looks like it's her hair. This looks like the texture of the model's hair curving all the way over here. So let's see here, drawing a little straight line into here. This goes all the way down here. I'm thinking of the negative space here. So there's a lot of spatial reasoning involved in this. You know, each one of these studies is pretty much a puzzle. You know, you're trying to understand the forms, you're trying to use simple straight lines and angles such as that, you know, the angle of the jaw. Now we're going to relate the angle of the jaw to, say, the corner of the back of the neck, pushing the neck even more inwards like that. Okay, so I guess right about there, pushing this over here. Okay, so as I mentioned before, this is a paint along. I will be guiding you along the process, but in times where I'm in very deep focus, I won't be speaking as much, so I'm going to go ahead and take my time now with the contours, okay? If I can get the contours, you know, relatively correct, it'll make the next stages much easier, in my opinion. So if you're drawing or painting along with me there, let's take our time in this stage. I'm moving the back of the skull a little bit over here. I'm trying not to use so much of my drawing medium. And again, if you want to know exactly what materials I'm using, I'll have all of that information typed up in the description box down below. Okay, so now let's take a look at the center line. So the model's pretty much in 3/4. I'd say a little closer to profile view, so just a very light line right there gives us our center line. So this is the corner of the side of the eye socket on one side, and the corner of the side of the eye socket, I'm going to make sure to observe this angle on the other side. Okay. Now let's look at the angle of the eyebrows a little bit. Think about the eyebrows as the top portion of the eye socket. Okay, so now we're going to work our way down. Let's just map out, excuse me, let's just map out the shape of the eye socket. I bet you thought the Mona Lisa when I wrote Leonardo da Vinci on the title. We could do that later on if you would like. But again, the purpose is not to create a master copy, okay? We're using our own techniques. And a lot of the learning, I think, isn't just looking at the, I know it's just a photograph, but just looking at the masterwork, you know, the one in the corner of the screen there. Just a very active observing that art, observing the master's artwork for a long period of time is very, I think it's very educational, if you would ask me. What is not so educational, I think, is to labor over it and, you know, try to trace out the outlines and then coloring it in and stuff like that. You know, I don't think that that's as beneficial to your learning experience. I think it's important to learn how to see, especially learn how to see in sequence. That's what we're after. Looking at the big things, the big picture, before getting hung up on too many small little details. Okay, so the bottom of the nose is going to go over there. And, you know, the more I observe the Da Vinci, the more I'm really fascinated with the geometry of the head. It seems very analytical. You know, I do have a math background, so I get it. I mean, I get that there's beauty in geometry, that there's beauty in complexity. But anyway, let's talk about the painting. So now we're moving into what I refer to as the main triangle, but not just me, of course a lot of other folks refer to this something along the lines of main triangle. So 2 points in space, okay, oops, I didn't mean to make those marks, but oh well. 2 points in space, and then a point here. 3 points in space. Connect those 3 points in space, and guess what? You have a triangle. So I tend to emphasize the main triangle, okay? That is the 2 eyes and the nose. And I kind of base everything around that. So now let's go ahead and throw in an iris. So the idea is to strategize, okay? So I wouldn't want to start with the chin. I wouldn't want to start with the forehead. I wouldn't want to start with the ear, even though we can't really see it, but I wouldn't want to start with any of those things. Just because what we want with the main triangle here is an anchor point, or anchor points, okay? And by the way, I'm not measuring with these master studies, so I'm not getting out a ruler or caliper or anything like that, though you've seen me do that in the future, really, in the past. You've seen me do that in the past, but I'm not doing that these days because I'm really trying to strengthen my observation skills. Okay, now let's relate this. I tend to look at the tear duct and drop a vertical. Okay, so dropping a vertical, the nose is give or take over there. Now we keep going down. So the mouth, I try to keep even more simplified. So now that I have the main triangle somewhat established, now the nose is a little bit long, I think. So let me move this up a little bit. Okay, so now the mouth, yeah, I'm going to keep the mouth very simple. Just a few little marks. Nothing too grand there. Let's look at the angle. Make sure these angles match up with one another. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out the shadow. So here's the cheekbone, zygomatic bone. Curves in like this. Goes down. Obviously there wasn't electric light back then, so of course the border between light and dark wouldn't be so sharp, but what I'm doing is I'm just kind of using a drawing tool, which is a line essentially, to map out exactly the border between light and dark. We're going to do the same over here. Okay. I'm just looking at the boundary corners over there. So I am taking much more care with this umber sketch. Not to say I'm careless with the other ones, but with this one, since it's a little more compressed in the lights, I think that's just the best strategy. Now let's look at the curve over here for the chin. So I'm using a dry, fairly used up bristle brush to push the paint around. I'm not using any extra medium here. I just have a drawing medium, which is essentially a thinner. I mean, that's the name of the medium. In the name of the medium is the word thinner. And a little aesthetic tip here. If you're going to do a head study like this, which I definitely recommend, always have some kind of indications for the shoulders, even though I really don't think I'm going to get into any of this stuff. But I at least want some kind of indication of the shoulder. Otherwise, I don't know if you feel the same way, but for me, if I'm seeing just a floating head in space, it kind of makes me feel a little uneasy. Now again, this looks very calculated, the shapes that I'm observing here. It's making me really think about the geometry involved in these shapes. It's almost starting to look like a red chalk drawing a little bit. A little bit of the shape of the cast shadow. So I usually say keep your shapes simple and easy. Keep your shapes simple and easy so that when the time comes to make changes, those changes are simple and easy to manage. Okay? So right now we're trying to see the whole at once. So that's why I'm kind of sketching in a little bit of a shadow shape. Okay? We really want to see the whole at once. And details, okay, remember this, okay? You might hate me for this, but that's okay. I'm kind of used to being hated these days. Detail is nothing, okay? Especially in the beginning, all right? Detail is nothing. Don't worry about detail. You know, all of the stuff like the pearls and things, that's not really what's the strong part of this painting. The pearls or like the way that that's wrapped over here, the headband, or like that's nothing, okay? I really don't think that that should be placed in so early in this painting. That's something that we can always add on later. We want to think about this structurally, okay? If you were to be constructing something, you know, like a shed, a house, a skyscraper or whatever, you wouldn't start off with the, you know, the curtains. You wouldn't start off with a doorknob. You would be looking at big picture. So we're approaching the 20-minute mark. So I think at the 20-minute mark, I will transition into color. But I just want to make sure that these shapes are, you know, well simplified, but in such a way that I can build on top of them. I'm going to put a little more drawing medium onto the brush. And what the drawing medium does, it just thins out the paint. But obviously it doesn't thin it out so much that I can't use it. Alright, so we're just about 30 seconds under the 20-minute mark, so I think that I'll let that be the umber sketch, the basic block in. So now we're going to move into the large plane stage. Okay, so now we have bristle brushes, okay? So a little bit of the mixing white and yellow ochre, cadmium red. Now that we're actually getting into the colors, you know, I'll be telling you what colors I'm using, but if you want to list and if you want to potentially purchase the same type of materials that I'm using and contribute a little bit to me, I have Amazon affiliate links in the description box down below. Okay. So more of the mixing white. Let's put a little bit of the alizarin crimson. So as you can see here, very simply, pretty much just mixing white, yellow ochre, cadmium red, tiny bit of raw umber. No, that's not raw umber. That's burnt sienna. So basically all of the warm colors together. Okay, so before I get too far, let me get the old palette knife. Clean off the excess there. I want to make sure that there's no extra medium on the brush. Okay, so now that is our first little indication of light. Isn't that, that's such an iconic moment in the painting, isn't it? When we're just starting to put in the light. So there's the side of the side plane of the cheekbone. So I'm trying to go for the right color and the right value right away. So I'm gonna add a little bit more of the mixing white. Knowingly, I think that I'm gonna go a little bit warmer, okay? I'm making the decision right now that I'm going to go a little bit warmer with the flush tones than what I'm seeing on my iPad, which is off the camera angle here, but I'm using an iPad to look at the photo reference. Okay, so there's a simple little plane there. So yeah, I'm gonna make the decision to go a little bit warmer, if that's okay with you. Okay, now I'm gonna get a different brush here. I'm gonna have a half-tone brush, same type of brush. Okay, they look the same. Okay, but they're different brushes. So a little more burnt umber. Mixing white, burnt sienna. I really do like burnt sienna. Brown is my favorite color. What's your favorite color? Go ahead, comment down below. But for me, brown is my favorite color. Alright, so the burnt sienna. Now we're starting to plane it out. Yep, I just made up that term. So what we're doing is we're looking at large planes, minimizing any kind of emphasis on detail, and we're looking at the big picture time, okay? No details, no minutia needed. Another little plane there. Okay. So now it's going to get even darker, so a little more burnt umber as the forms roll across to the side of the eye socket. Getting even darker over here as we start to establish the connectivity between the two planes. Okay. Now for the bottom plane of the lower eyelid, it's going to be a little bit lighter than, say, that shape. There we go. Now while I have the same value, I'm going to go ahead and use that on the side over here. Switching to the lighter brush, I'm going to very gently do this. See how I'm connecting the planes to one another. And already we have a sense of depth, a little bit of a sense of depth over here. And that's what you can obtain quite quickly with value, with an understanding of value. there's a lot of thinking involved in this, okay? And like I said, this is not, the intent here is not to use the same type of techniques that Da Vinci used, okay? This is not a history lesson on Da Vinci. This is 100% about painting. It's getting slightly lighter here. Super solid shape there for the Glabella. This is probably the most well differentiated angle I've ever seen for a Glabella before. So there's the plane for the Glabella, a very triangular, simplified looking shape. And then of course as we move up closer to the light, we're going to be seeing more and more light. So it appears that the window, or whatever light source, it had to be a window, but it appears that the window must have been somewhere above, like this, the light rays hitting in this direction. Okay, alright, so now I'm going to start to put in the side plane of the nose, so switching brushes here. Okay, so I'm losing a little bit of specificity into this edge, but it's okay. As long as the big picture is intact, we'll go in later and add more specificity over there. So now we're painting in the side plane of the nose. It appears a little bit cooler. I'm going to use this sap green. A little bit of sap green in the corner there. Just for a little bit of variance in the color. Switching brushes, I'm actually going to go a little bit warmer over here. So the alizarin. So what you're starting to see develop here is the color value web. So that's how I utilize the palette, okay? The values are going to get darker as it goes further down. And maybe the hue will change from left to right, I don't know. But that's how I organize the palette. Letting these edges blend a little bit. So a little bit of light on the bulb of the nose. And again, we are in the big plane stage, okay? Then later we're going to go in and subdivide these planes into just much more specificity, basically. A little bit darker under here. Now I'm going to use the halftone brush. Get a little darker and warmer. The eye socket shape over here. Now that we're going to move down in these shapes, excuse my English, now that we're moving down, there's going to be a little bit more warmth, okay? So cadmium red into the color value web. Mixing white. If you're wondering why I have two whites, I can use more of this without raising the value too much, therefore allowing me to have a thicker consistency of paint, which is what I want. But if I want to raise the value dramatically, very quickly, I'll transition into the titanium white. A little bit more pink, a little bit less saturated. So a way to bring down the saturation of the pink flesh tone can be the burnt sienna. And we're going to follow through on the other side. Like so. Now we're going to move towards the darker planes. So that is the bottom portion of the cheekbone, the mandible. A little bit lighter now. Titanium white. Titanium white. Yeah, that I meant to use titanium white, but I didn't. This is the titanium white. See how it raises the value very quickly? Yeah, that's what we want. Okay. Now I'm going to follow through and put that plane up here. Just relating these planes all around. A little bit more alizarin. Titanium white, yellow ochre, and that value also exists down here, side of the mouth, top plane of the chin. Okay, I'm going to be looking at the structure, the structures surrounding the mouth, okay, before getting too heavily involved into the mouth. So I'm not going to be worried too much about the minutia around the lips, okay. Rather, we're going to be constructing the structure surrounding the lips, and then later we'll get into the lips. Whoops, I should be switching brushes. Caught myself before I made my light brush into a dark brush. A little bit more light. Titanium white. Yellow ochre. Going to switch to the halftone brush. The almighty halftone brush. Now I feel like I sound like Bill Alexander. comment down if you heard of Bill Alexander. I really do enjoy Bob Ross and Bill Alexander. Which, by the way, off topic, I heard that a lot of Bob Ross paintings are going to be on display pretty soon. I think sometime this week, somewhere in Virginia. I live pretty close to Virginia, so you will most likely see me there. I'll drop whatever is going on to go see the Bob Ross paintings in person. So if this video ends up being uploaded a little bit later, you might know why. Go ahead, comment down below, actually, please do, if you have already went to see the Bob Ross paintings, since I know that you're going to be seeing this in the future relative to me, because, you know, I have to edit it and finish it and all that stuff. But yeah, comment down below if you actually did go to the Bob Ross painting exhibition. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and look at the planes surrounding the forehead a little bit more. Lighter up here. It's going to get darker as it turns away. There we go. Now to the halftone brush. The almighty halftone brush. Okay, so now we're going to get the same color, put in the shape for the shoulder, but again, not much detail for that. Just so we know that the shoulder is there. And now what I'm going to do is get a different brush. Where's my brush? Okay, this one. So burnt umber, ultramarine blue, and just those two. And we're using color to draw the boundaries of the form here. So since this is a Leonardo da Vinci, I suspect I'm going to have a lot of people trying to write to me that they want to cut off my head or something. So I would like to have my defense crew in the comment section down below. For the folks that don't understand what I was saying before about master study, okay? So I have a feeling folks are going to want a history lecture, sorry, you know, talking and painting is kind of difficult, but yeah, I suspect I'm going to get a lot of that, like, you didn't talk about the history, it doesn't look exactly like the painting, blah 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 blah. So yeah, if you've been keeping up on the channel a lot, yeah, I encourage you to be my defense crew in the comments. And if you do want to contact me, like if you've been wanting to ask me questions or something like that, the best way to reach me is my Instagram. Just because I don't have so many messages to go through on Instagram. And it's just much simpler for me to use that platform. And if you follow me on Instagram, you actually see the work that I'm producing. I'm working on a bunch of figure paintings, portrait paintings. So a little bit more burnt umber, ultramarine blue, Okay, so now I'm gonna switch to, I did something without even explaining it. So I'm using two brushes at once, okay, to draw this edge. So let me show you what I mean. A little bit of sap green, just because. Okay. So I'm trying to make this edge softer and then sharper down here by the chin. And softer again for the bottom of the chin. Okay, so I think we have a pretty good pretty well established large framework for these planes. So I think what I'm going to do now is transition into smaller brushes and start to subdivide these smaller shapes. Alright, so it's smaller brush time. So I'm just going to be using the smaller brushes all around here. Hopefully I can keep my hand straight. I did drink coffee earlier, which I'm going to end up regretting pretty soon, just because my hands are going to be shaky. And in case you didn't notice, with the camera angle is front and center pretty much. So I'm leaning over a camera, which does cause quite a lot of neck pain. But I'm doing this because I care about you. I care about you having the best camera angle that you can possibly have. I even have a microphone set up really close to me so you can have better audio, minus my air conditioning unit. Yeah, I can't do anything about that, but you know. In any case, it just means that you're going to see me struggling a little bit with my posture, basically trying to lean over and make these brush strokes. It's quite difficult. Okay, alright, so now let's switch into a different brush, the one I use for the background. So just burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, mixing white. We're gonna have a kind of cooler yet still brownish color for the iris. Okay, alright, so I think I need a little more light up here. Okay, so I'm gonna use my use the drawing brush from earlier as a smaller brush now. So now let's get a little bit of this darker tone, add a little more burnt sienna, tear duct. Did anyone order a tear duct? And we have the tear duct on one side. And how about we put a tear duct on the other side? There. I did promise you earlier that we would come back in and make these shapes more specific, and that's what we're doing now. Easy does it. Stand back. So every time that I stand back or sit back, or even whenever I say stand back or sit back, that is an open invitation for you to stand back or sit back as well, so that we're kind of in sync when we're drawing or painting. We're synchronized. So why is it important to stand back? Standing back is important for a number of reasons. Mainly the big one really is to not get too caught up on any small little details and then missing out on the big picture. You want to always think about the big picture. So black and white and some flesh tone is the color for the sclera. Sclera is the white of the eye. And remember, the white of the eye is not white. Okay. So now we're getting more, I guess, believability to these shapes. I keep bumping into the camera. Sorry about that. Here we have the bottom plane, the lower eyelid. Okay, not perfect, but it'll have to do for now. Gonna stand back. So I'm getting quite a lot of glare over here, so synthetic brush to the rescue. Okay. Now then, I'm going to continue to shape the features. So let's take a look at the nose. So this is the wing of the nose. Now let's go ahead and switch to a different brush. Again, they look like the same brushes, but they are different. So a different brush here. But they look way too similar, so I may end up confusing them. I'll try not to, though. Side of the nose. Now we're gonna switch back. A little bit of a warmer hue. The bulb of the nose. little more light for the bulb of the nose. Now here's where it would help to have a very soft brush. So here's a little tip. So you start off with a large bristle brush, okay, lay out all of those planes, and then when you want to add onto the planes, if you don't want to use too much medium but still paint wet on wet, using a softer brush will actually help to do that without having to use too much medium. These days I'm really trying not to use too much medium, just to, you know, change things up, have a little bit of variety in my techniques. But yeah, that's my little tip for you. If you can have softer brushes for your smaller shapes, definitely invest in those. Alright, so now we're going to move, excuse me, now we're going to move on to the mouth, well, I guess the lips, or should we? Hold on. I think we need a little more information for the nose. There's a little more light on the bulb of the nose than I'm giving credit for. There. Just softening a little bit. Okay, so now with the mouth, oh dear, where do I even begin? Okay, so we're going to use the same light brush, cadmium red, mixing white, alizarin, so now we're painting the largest. Basically, I was looking for the largest plane to start with, which happens to be the lower lip. Now, kind of running into a little trouble here with my brushes. I'm gonna get a smaller brush, just burnt umber, cadmium red. Following the center line. Now that's a very Da Vinci-esque looking smile, or a Da Vinci smile, almost like kind of a poker face. Okay, alright, so now just use some of this color that we had before. So now we're starting to put in the upper lip. Mixing white, yellow ochre onto the same brush. I'm going to stand back. Alright, so not too much trouble with the lips. So now that we have the features somewhat well established, I'm actually going to clean off this brush. So now that we have the features somewhat established, I'm going to stand back again. Alright, so burnt umber. So now how about we go for some of the darks. So burnt umber, ultramarine, alizarin, so that's a dark accent there, but I'm going to go back into it after I put in the same shape over here. I don't want it to be too sharp, then it'll look like, you know, artificial, like too much like eyeliner or something like that. So to not have that effect, I'm gonna try to soften. I'm softening by, as you just saw, and mixed up kind of an intermediate value. Just very lightly softening around the edge there. Something I forgot to mention earlier in the earlier stages, there's something that I tend to refer to as the awkward stage, which is what makes, I think, portraiture one of the most, if not the most difficult subject in all of painting. But so basically we're kind of used to seeing finished faces, so to speak. We don't walk around and we don't walk around and see like an unfinished face, unless you're like me and you're really nearsighted and you for some reason don't wear your glasses. Then you will see kind of like blobs of color or things like that. So I actually kind of tried my best to avoid the awkward stage with this painting. Usually when you go in with large shapes of color and try to sculpt out the forms like that, you tend to go through an awkward stage that's a little bit more harsh, I think, than if you were to draw it out like we did earlier. So a little note there on why I focused on the drawing a little bit more before getting into too much stuff with color. Mostly just because I didn't want to look too bad, you know, having a really messed up looking shape, you know, outside shape, which I actually kind of enjoy sometimes. I'm gonna get back on topic in like a second here, but sometimes I enjoy, as you've seen before, just throwing in like a mass of color and then sculpting things out from there, which leads to a pretty heavy awkward stage, which I actually kind of, it doesn't bother me so much, but I thought with you know, Da Vinci, I'd probably have to err a little more on the safe side. Now back to topic here. So I'm just putting in the accent here. Remember, an accent is what happens when one form overlaps over another, blocking a lot of the light, so that's what creates that dark little crease. Now a little bit of drawing medium just to thin out the paint, ivory black, alizarin, ultra, and here we have the shape for the pupil. Whoa, I just moved the canvas. Hopefully it didn't affect anything. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and clean off this brush off camera. So while I'm cleaning off the brush, I'll just talk with you a little bit. So today is actually a Monday for me, and it's actually the first day of my portrait painting class. I'm teaching an evening portrait painting class. So I was actually just typing up the syllabus last week. I was typing it up last week. Well, I already had a syllabus, but I'm just kind of editing stuff on the syllabus. So it's very interesting to write visual things down. It's almost weirder for me to write stuff, visual stuff, you know, like planes of the face. You know, even typing the word warm-ish or cool-ish, it's kind of strange, I will say. But anyway, I'm very excited to meet my new students. And of course I would love to travel and teach workshops and things like that, and it would be nice to teach at a university or something. You kind of need an MFA for that. Okay, stand back. I think the highlight's a little too strong. I'll clean off the brush again. Off camera. Ultramarine. This highlight was a little too strong. There we go. Now it's a little more subtle, I think. So a little bit of burnt umber, yellow ochre. I want something that's kind of neutral, warm gray. So I paint in a plane, and now I'm going to soften the boundary between that plane and the surrounding shapes with a synthetic brush. Okay. I'm gonna do the same over here. Just softening the planes, okay. We're allowed to do that. And this really comes down to paint handling as well. You know, how comfortable are you with your medium or mediums? And that comfort just comes with practice, really. So we put in a plane and then soften the areas surrounding it. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing for the concavity of the eye socket. I did mention I was teaching a class a couple of videos ago. I don't know if I remember to put the link to the class, but I did mention the school, Howard County Arts Council, and my open portrait session is beginning this week as well, so kind of a busy week. So I also run a Tuesday morning portrait group. So if you're following me on Instagram, you're gonna basically see all of the new fun and exciting poses and paintings that are going to take place. But anyway, softening the concavity of the eye socket there. What am I doing? I need to differentiate the plane first, so let's do that. Consider the plane differentiated. Alright, now let's soften. Clean and dry synthetic brush. Okay. Same brush. Obviously, I think the eyes are a little bit wider in the original, but I'm not going to stress over that. Just softening a little bit more. Okay. I think now would be a good time to start to get into the Terminator line over here. Let me define what I mean by that, which is also in my syllabus for my students. But basically, the boundary, okay, between light and dark. I keep talking about my class. I'm so happy that my class is running. It's actually pretty hard for me to get students to take my class. I think I have like 8 students so far. Well, I guess that's pretty much it because I think the registration already closed. But anyway, I'm going to define these terms for you. So the Terminator line, okay, is what I drew in earlier. It's the boundary between light and dark. That's the Terminator line. So that's basically the area where light terminates and shadow begins. So that's what we are establishing with a pretty sharp edge, which we'll go and soften in a minute. But we want this boundary to be well established. Now, I'm going to come back in with a soft brush. And just soften the edge around it. The softer I can get this transition, the more naturalistic it will look. So in order to make the transition a little bit more believable, I'm going to put in an intermediate value, which can also be referred to as the dark light. It is the value, is the halftone just as light transitions into shadow. So it kind of, as you see there, literally sits on top of the Terminator line. Okay, now that we have that, let's soften. Okay, so I think I'm still missing a little bit of that arc there. Let me make sure my camera's still running. Okay, so I think I'm still missing a little bit of the arc there. So I established that again with the Terminator line. And now we'll go in with the dark light. And now we'll just soften. Okay, so now we have a little more of that arc. Obviously it's not exactly like the original, but like I said, that's not what this is about. A little bit more burnt umber. And there's actually going to be a little bit of reflected light down there, so what am I gonna do? A little bit of yellow ochre. Let's try that. Try to paint this reflected light. Now if you're creating this master study with me, be very careful with that reflected light. If we make it too light, it's going to break the form. It's going to break the illusion of form. So even that much is still kind of unsettling to me. I don't want it to be too light. And while we have that color, let's just spread the tone for the bottom of the neck. As I said before, I don't really think I'm going to do too much for the bottom of the neck. Okay. Alright, so now I'm going to get the background brush. What brush did I use for that? I think it was this one. Ultramarine, Raw Umber. Obviously there's like a little ponytail there, but again, not really focused on the details here. Okay, so while I have this dark value, I might as well start to put in this shape here for, again, I'm kind of confused at what this is. I think it's the hair going down. And I reiterate, this is not a history lesson, okay? This is 100% about painting, with some little side stories in between, but mostly about painting. And again, I want this edge to be really soft. I want it to be exacting but soft, if that makes any sense. And it looks like my camera is about to die, so I'm gonna go ahead and swap out a battery. Alright, so I just swapped out a battery, so hopefully that didn't change the camera angle too much. So let's continue to paint the hair. So let's look at the planes, okay, for the hair. So it's going to be darker over here because this plane is facing the light a little bit less. Now when it comes to values, okay, there are local value changes, okay? There are areas that have, you know, just that are darker, such as the lips, and this is a very predominant area here. Obviously the value, the average value here is nowhere near the values for the face. So for instance, let's take a little bit of flesh tone. So a plane such as this one right here that we're painting in is in the same angle, relatively same angle as these planes up here, excuse me, but they're not as light. So again, there are areas within a given structure, like all around here, that are going to have variety in terms of their values based on the angle that the plane has with respect to the light. You know, that this area is further away from the light than, say, this area. You know, it's this area is facing the light less than this area. But, you know, when we get down to local value changes, which is what I'm calling it, so these areas all around here, yes, they are facing the light very similarly to these planes, but the local value is darker, therefore this value is going to have to get darker. So if you struggle with values, I know I probably could have explained that a little bit better. If you're struggling with values, I think this would be a really good exercise. This master study would be a really good one just because of the variance between these values, the set of values here, and then the set of values over here, which is actually something I'm probably about to struggle with now. So as we move down towards these planes, they're going to get darker, okay, but not quite as dark. So I'm going to start off with making the corners darker. So the corners all around here, okay. So I'm going to start off by making these darker, and then I'm going to just use the flesh tones basically to add in some more planes. So if you struggle with hair as well, it could be that you're just not thinking about it as much as structurally as you could be thinking about it. So it's darker over here for the little headband that we'll put in later. Hopefully I won't forget, but in any case, now the planes are starting to turn closer to the light. See this? How I'm moving up in the value scale. See how it's starting to create a little more believability in the forms. And then over here it's going to be lighter. And I'm applying the brush strokes in this direction, okay? And the reason I'm applying the brush strokes in that direction is just to eliminate glare, just so I don't have too much glare. And remember, glare is just when the oil paint reflects the light, which is not something that is very desirable, especially when you're making YouTube videos featuring oil paintings. You typically don't want it to glare too much. But I found that these particular types of oil paints that I'm using actually glare less than more traditional oil paints. At least in my experience. Okay, so now that we have that shape for the hair, I'm gonna switch to the, oh dear, okay, so I need a larger brush. So luckily I planned ahead and I had a larger brush on hand. So now we're going to fill in the background. I'm going to add a little bit of my medium, the drawing medium, just to thin out the paint. Let's add a little bit more. Let's test this out for a second here. Okay, it's not glaring. Awesome. Okay, so now that we're filling in the background, you can either skip ahead to when the background is completely filled in, or you can stick with me for story time. Though I don't really have much story time to say or to talk about. So what am I going to talk about? Let's talk about the material. Okay, so it still relates to oil painting. Let's talk about this mysterious material that I have been using for the past a long time. Okay, it's been more than a month now I've been using this material. More than a month that I've been using this material versus traditional oil paints. So these are water cleanable oil paints. If you Google that, you probably won't find what I'm talking about because they're referred to as water mixable oil paints. I do not like that term. I call them water cleanable. In my head, I call them water cleanable because they are oil paints. Okay, these are oil paints. The only difference is you can clean them with water. Earlier, when I was first experimenting with these oil colors, I mixed them with water, and I mean they're kind of made for that kind of it's like they're made to thin with water. You can thin them with water. You can work that way, but I don't recommend it. Now I'm speaking to you with much more experience with this material, and I've been using it in my studio work and all of that stuff. So what I will say about the water cleanable is that you want to treat it exactly like oil paint. Okay, so as you saw here, I didn't use any medium. Okay, I just used medium to draw, my drawing medium. In the past, okay, so I'm going to relate this to traditional oil paints, okay? So again, this is all story time until I fill in these areas. So in the past, I would be using traditional oil paints and just odorless mineral spirits or maybe Neo McGilt medium to, you know, thin out the paint for the background. Now, all I have is the drawing medium, which is let's see, I should have it on camera here on side. Okay, this is the drawing medium, okay? And yes, I did take the camera off autofocus, particularly for that shot, but autofocus is back, so hopefully it doesn't mess up. But anyway, that's it. I mean, that's all I'm using. Now when it comes to layering the oil paints, I have noticed, okay, and this might change in the future, but for now, I have noticed that in between layers, when you paint with less medium, particularly suppose in these darker halftones and in the shadow, it doesn't fade quite as much when you do that versus when you use a lot of the Neo McGilp that I was using before, or even the Stand Oil mix that I was using before. It doesn't fade out as much, so when it does fade a little bit, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, this when oil paintings dry, they tend to fade a little bit. It's just natural, it's just something that happens, and then you just apply medium on it. Well, with the these water mixables, I haven't been having that issue, too much of the color fading out. And again, if you want to see the paintings that I'm talking about, they're all on Instagram. I can't really share them here on YouTube because a lot of them are figure paintings, and we know that YouTube is not friendly to figure paintings. So yeah, enough of that. So a little bit of a story of my recent expedition, or should we say recent experiments with different materials, in particular with what I'm calling water cleanable oil paints. Anyway, enough about that. So as you see, it doesn't glare as much, right? The background is not glaring, like hardly at all, which is amazing with a capital. Let's say amazing with all letters capital. It's amazing that it's not glaring, and that's something that I truly enjoy. And now with the burnt sienna, I'm just putting in the little, what would you call this, the ponytail? Obviously not with as much detail. And if you're wondering why, it's not for health reasons or anything like that I'm using this medium. It's just because I wanted to experiment. I just kind of wanted to be different. So yeah, that's why. But there's also a kind of nice caveat to this. I never even say that word. But anyway, there's another nice thing to this, is that it's so cheap. It's very inexpensive, these paints. So I feel much nicer using more paint these days. I don't know. That's just how I feel about it. Some of you might like that. Some of you might not. I suspect a lot of you won't, but you know, I'm trying to share the truth with you. Okay, I'm going to leave that alone. Now, let's go ahead and start to put in the hairband. See, I already put in the value here for where the hairband's going to fit. So I'm going to use the drawing medium to thin out the paint. We're going to go alla prima, meaning wet on wet. A little more medium. I don't want it to be straight dark, so that's why I'm using the sap green, a little bit of alizarin, yellow ochre. I want a dark, but I don't want, you know, I don't want to use the darkest value possible. Okay, alright. Okay, now I'm going to stop. Alright, we gotta be brave here. Okay, so I started turning it a little bit over there so that it would seem as though it was turning. Okay, I can breathe now. Alright, so we have the hairband there. Not perfect, obviously, but you know, we have a hairband. So let's use the yellow ochre, cadmium red, and I purposefully didn't clean the brush just because, you know, I kind of wanted this to mix in with this. And this is going to be the color for whatever this thing is on top of her head. Again, this is all about painting, okay? No historical stuff needed here. There are other videos for that. There are much more knowledgeable people in those departments than I am in, you know, the history of this. Okay, so now I'm gonna have to be careful with this. I'm gonna use a squiggly, wobbly brush technique for this. Obviously, I'm going to go over it a few more times, but that's just to kind of establish where that is going to go. Now, going to soften. When in doubt, blur it out, so I'm just softening. Using wobbly brush technique. If you've been watching for a while, you might recall wobbly brush technique. There. And you know, why not? Well, we'll put a few of these little beads in there, but not too much. So let's just paint that down there. So I'm thinking of the vignette, thinking very carefully of the vignette. And the vignette is the area that you leave unfinished to complement the areas that are more finished. So about like that. I mean, that's probably how I'm going to leave the vignette. That's more down to your own personal aesthetic. So then again, like the little gray area that I leave there kind of suggests the clothing there, so YouTube doesn't try to demonetize me or anything like that. Hopefully they won't. But now we're gonna go in with well, whatever. Let's just use this dark mixture here. Burnt umber, ultra, and let's just start to paint in the beads. Just a light touch. Obviously I want the edge to be, sorry, the value to be lighter. I don't want it to be as dark as it is in the original painting, just because I don't want to emphasize the beads too much. So like I said before, now we're reaching more specific things in this painting. And like I said, you wouldn't want to begin this master study with the beads. Just like if you're building a house or some kind of structure, like this is like the equivalent of a doorknob, or like doorknobs to a house or a building of some sort. We're just gonna let this go off camera or off canvas. So we'll just crop. And there you have it. It's not perfect by any stretch of the word perfect. And again, it is a master study, not a master copy, but I'm not going to go over all of that stuff again that I was talking about before. Yes, I do think that this is a little bit dark. So now I'm just going to be messing around with the last few brush strokes. But pretty much this is pretty much going to be it. I mean, I don't think that I'm going to stress too much over this. Although again, there is something to talk about in terms of the fear involved in portrait painting, especially you know, when you're trying to create a master study of a Leonardo da Vinci. I'm really trying to not think about this so much with fear. You know, I'm thinking about plane, like this plane over here. I'm thinking about edge, color, and I'm not trying to use, you know, Da Vinci's technique, or this isn't about how Leonardo da Vinci painted or anything like that. This is about a master study, okay? This is about you painting along with me, all of us learning together. That's what this is about. It's a learning exercise with a painting as an end result, okay? So now we're just pretty much down into the main, confusing myself. It's pretty much the ending, really. The few little brush strokes. And I'm sure I've received a lot of questions about this. When to call it? Like, when is a study done? And really, a study is done, or a painting is finished, in my opinion, when you're done, like when you don't want to work on it anymore. And I'm approaching that point. Okay, I don't want to push it too close to the original. I want it to be more about the learning experience involved in this, learning experience involved in this. So now that we lightened up that shape a little bit, let's just go ahead and soften. Like I said, not perfect by any stretch of the word perfect, but I think that this is a pretty good paint along, okay? I think this is a pretty good learning experience for all of us. And I learn a lot from these as well. You know, just the very act of observing, a picture of a Da Vinci, or, looking at a picture of a Van Gogh, looking at a picture of a Caravaggio, a Waterhouse, Joaquin Sorolla, Velasquez, just the act of observing, it teaches us a lot. Okay, I keep fiddling with the painting. I'm going to end up doing more than I want to do, so let's just soften, soften, soften. I know you're thinking, you probably just throw the brush already. I'm getting there, don't worry. Just want to make sure that that's not too dark. Okay. Okay, throw the brush. Alright. That being said, I really hope that today's episode helps you out. Always remember to keep positive. Remember, in a world that can be so negative, be the spark that ignites positivity among all of us. Just putting on a smile, really, it can change the world in so many ways if all of us just smile more often, laugh more often, enjoy life. That being said, always keep on painting. I really do hope that these videos help you out. I wish you the very best in all of your artwork, and I'll see you on the next episode.